Hi, everyone. My name is Mio Stevens-Gandara, Assistant Professor of Photography and current organizer for cultural events at Rio Hondo College. The Cultural Events program at Rio Hondo College presents a diverse selection of arts and entertainment free of charge for our community. Rio Hondo's Cultural Events program showcases the visual and performing arts work of students and faculty, as well as regional, national, and international artists. We continue with our programming today that focuses on three categories: honoring ancestors, preserving culture for future generations, and youth and community empowerment. If we should face any technical difficulties today, please be patient. We will work it out. If you have questions, please post them and we will answer them at the end of the talk. This week, we are really excited to have had 3 days of events with SelfHelp Graphics and art. Yesterday and today, we have a lecture series on Dia de los Muertos and SelfHelp Graphics. And tomorrow, we will have a workshop. We will learn Papel Picado with Martha Carrillo. But today, we are really honored to present artist Consuelo Flores. A multidisciplinary artist, Consuelo received the SelfHelp Graphics Legacy Artist Award for her cultural work. She has built Dia de los Muertos altars at Irvine Fine Arts Center, Fig and 7th, ABC 7, Panamanian International Film Festival, and Grand Park. She has lectured on Dia de los Muertos celebrations at academic institutions throughout California. Social justice and cultural work are her passions. Welcome, Consuelo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very much looking forward to this presentation, and I thank you again for the opportunity to share my culture. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about SelfHelp Graphics and my own relationship with SelfHelp Graphics and why that's important. So one of the things that you all need to know is that the history of Day of the Dead in the United States began in two cultural institutions, one of them being SelfHelp Graphics. The other one was Galeria de la Raza in San Francisco, which no longer exists. So the fact that SelfHelp Graphics has such a legacy is really important to acknowledge. My own art practice actually began at SelfHelp Graphics. I was born into a family. I was the last of 10 children that was very, very first generation, had to be successful. Art was always put on as in the back burner as a hobby. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that art is not just a hobby, but it's a cultural identity, and it gives you value. It gives you an understanding of your place. And that's what I really recognized through SelfHelp Graphics and art. I started attending SelfHelp Graphics as a participant in 1981. I went there to view an art exhibit, and it was in October of 1981. And so I started as a participant, but I quickly became very enmeshed in the organization because it was welcoming. It was not only welcoming, it really spoke to a deficit, a void in my own personal cultural identity. And so in intermixing, I was a first generation born in the United States. I was able to identify with a lot of the people that were there, artists such as Leo Limon and Willie Geron and Dolores Guerrero Cruz. There were Irena Cervantes. They were all first generation born here, but they spoke to having a dual identity. You were not quite Mexican, but you were not quite American. You were both. And this was a very creative outlet, very healthy outlet for me to engage in. So I started off as a participant, but I quickly became part of the artist circle. I started doing, participating in Day of the Dead celebrations early on. And at one point in SelfHelp Graphics' history, in 1989, to be exact, there was no Day of the Dead celebration. So in 1988, in 1989, I brought it back, and so I became part of the vehicle that created more momentum for the celebration to take part or to take place. And it was really, really an important celebration. And the reason why is because this particular celebration, as I mentioned, was there were only two organizations that started this celebration here in the United States as a public celebration. There were a lot of private celebrations, but nothing was public. And so it was really important that the public celebration take place because it was about a year and a half after the riots in East Los Angeles. The riots were instigated by, it was believed, by the LA County Sheriff's Department. It was a protest against the war in Vietnam, and there was a lot of inequity. So there was a march during that time on August 29th, 1970. And that, believe it or not, was the root, that was the reason for SelfHelp Graphics taking on Day of the Dead as a celebration of life. Because after that incident in 1970, the community felt very disconnected and very wounded. And so SelfHelp Graphics, with the help of artists in 1972, decided to bring the community back together. And instead of protesting a war or having a march against death, it was a celebration of life. And that is truly what Day of the Dead is. So there is a very social political history behind it in its roots, but since then it has become a huge celebration. My role in this celebration has been that of bringing the community together and making sure that we have a reason to celebrate. And Day of the Dead offers an opportunity and offers a platform to not only celebrate those people who have died in our personal lives, but also those people who have died in uh, community activism, say, for example, or people who are victims of some type of genocide or some type of mass um, murders, or for example, the El Paso victims, because it's a political, they were political targets. Um, I have remained connected with SelfHelp Graphics for since 1981. I did become a board member for a few years. I worked very diligently. I still do in trying to connect um, professional organizations or other different artists with the organization, with SelfHelp Graphics. I think it's very important that all of us recognize that um, without our cultural identity, we can sometimes go astray. And for me, SelfHelp Graphics represents an opportunity to connect not only with our community, but with ourselves. And that's really important. So Dia de los Muertos, as I mentioned earlier, it started here in Los Angeles um, as a social political reorganization of sorts. And Gabe, if you can start here, that would be great with the slides. And so we're going to get have a history, a visual history of SelfHelp Graphics's Day of the Dead celebrations. So this was back in the day, and this was before SelfHelp Graphics moved to what was its location for about 20 years. It has since moved again, and hopefully, and this time the organization has bought the building, so I doubt it will move again. But the origins of the celebration actually started in indigenous culture. Indigenous culture was had a huge ceremony to honor their dead. The dead were revered. They would disinter the dead, especially those who were important in the community, and talk about the dead to the remaining villagers or the remaining community who needed to know about who they were in terms of their lineage. So the elders in the community would speak to those who were gathered and talk about the person who had died, and they would disinter them, and they had a belief that in the head, the skull, that part of the body contained the history. And so they would honor that person by removing that part of the body and presenting it to the community. So there was a deeply indigenous ritual that is associated with what we now know as Day of the Dead. Now, in the 16th century or the 1600s, when Cortez came and conquered Mexico, uh, that became a when Catholicism was introduced, it was very, very horrifying, quote unquote, for the Europeans who came to see how the indigenous people were disinterring the dead and talking about them. So what they did was they inculcated and baptized, what I say is baptized by the sword, all of the indigenous people. And they eradicated any of the indigenous ceremony, but they also knew that they couldn't alienate them. So November 1st, which was All Saints Day, and November 2nd, which was All Souls Day, became the time of the year in the Catholic Church to honor the dead. And it actually coincided on purpose with the indigenous ceremony of honoring the dead, which was in the fall. So once that happened, uh, some of the rituals that were indigenous based became more acceptable. So instead of disinterring the dead, they created a sort of a surrogate, which would be the sugar skull or the skull period. You have ceramic skulls and you have names of the deceased on the ceramic skull forehead. The sugar skull was actually a mechanism in which death, the concept of death, was introduced to children. Those were actually edible. And so it was made with almond paste and sugar, and it would be a treat for the child to get the sugar skull. And then they would talk about the experience of death and how either the grandparents or someone in their family was now represented in this type of celebration, and they were able to remember them and not be a scary memory. So that is really the indigenous roots of the celebration and how the Catholic Church came into being, and actually did influence the celebration. As far as the celebration is concerned, it is not a religious celebration. It is truly a spiritual one. The fact that the Catholic Church came in and sort of integrated their own um, philosophy and their own religious beliefs into the community was not so much about the celebration as much as it was about just trying to convert the people. But this celebration is truly about honoring the life of the people who have died, or the lives of the people who have died, and really acknowledging your own mortality. So there are three different basic reasons for the celebration. Is, as I said, honoring and memorializing those people who have died, recognizing your own mortality, and because of that, you celebrate not only your own life, but the life of everyone else that you come in contact with. That is truly the basics of the celebration. But there obviously goes a lot goes into that. The altar is a huge part of that celebration. The altar started off as an ofrenda, an indigenous ofrenda. Ofrenda is offering. And what you're doing is you're basically offering either sustenance, or you're offering your love, you're offering your acknowledgement, you're offering your honoring of those people who have died, and you're also offering the recognition that at some point you too will be part of that. If you can stop here, Gabe, that is the second place that Self-Help Graphics existed. That was on the corner of Gage and what was called Brooklyn Avenue. At the time, it is now called Cesar Chavez Avenue. So that is the stairwell that went upstairs to the main floor and also to the office. This place, by the way, has history in that Los Lobos started off performing concerts at this building in that upstairs salon. That's just an aside. And downstairs to the left of that staircase is where the gallery was, and right underneath that staircase, between the staircase and the ladder, is the entrance to the etching room, where a lot of the most elaborate etchings that were produced by artists in East Los Angeles actually started off in that little room between that ladder and the staircase. So that's just as an FYI. It's a very and also the wall, if you see it, it's textured. That wall is textured by an artist by the name of Eduardo Oropesa, who died before he was able to finish that. He lived part-time in New Mexico and part-time in Los Angeles. And when he would come back from New Mexico, he would bring with him pieces of tile, and he would then go back to work on the facade of the building, putting clay on the building and then adding the tile so it looked like a mosaic. And there are pieces of duck heads that are sticking out of the wall. Just amazing pieces of ceramic and amazing pieces of tile that he brought back from New Mexico. So okay, I'm going to continue, go back to the part where I was talking about celebrating life, the three basic reasons of the celebration, which are I'm sorry. So I'm sorry, Gabe, but if you could hold there, you can see that that is where he left off. That's a really great. The second half beyond the arch was completed, and then before that, or ahead of that, it was not. The arch in the corner was not completed. So honoring and recognizing our own mortality is really, and celebrating our lives on a daily basis is really the ultimate celebration of that, of the Day of the Dead. So the levels of the altar are very important. There are 3 levels. The ground level is basically that connective tissue. If you can stop there, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just, every time I see a photograph, I want to just, so this was a paper fashion show that we did in 1982, I want to say. This is Marisa Leal. She was part of the fashion show for Day of the Dead. If all of the fashions for this particular show were made entirely of paper. And the reason being is that it was an understanding that life is ephemeral, just like papel picado, which you will be having, I understand, a workshop tomorrow on papel picado. Papel picado is one of the most traditional and most beautiful art forms for the Day of the Dead. And we wanted to sort of merge the idea of fashion being so fleeting and so yesterday, with the idea of the ephemeral nature of life represented by paper. And so the paper fashion shows were a big hit. So much so that it became just recently part of SelfHelp Graphics' repertoire, and we're going to be hopefully doing that again after this pandemic. We will revisit that and hopefully launch that again. But this was the original celebration or presentation of the paper fashion show for a Day of the Dead celebration, and it was truly to understand that everything is ephemeral, everything is finite, everything as it is created is becoming it is losing its connection. So, and what I mean by that is that it is truly fragile. Life is very fragile. So we need to recognize its fragility. We need to recognize its importance in our own time here on earth, whether it is our life or the life of our neighbor or the life of someone else that we may not even know but somehow impacts us. So going back, thank you so much, Gabe. The next one is also, that's Marisela Norte. Marisela Norte, Loteria is the game that is on her fashion. Loteria is very symbolic of the Day of the Dead because it is a game of chance, and life is a game of chance. And this was also, by the way, these two fashions were created, designed and created by Armando Norte, and that is Marisela Norte. This is Linda Gamboa on the left and Diane Gamboa on the right, which they were part of that same celebration of the paper fashion show, and they were it was an absolutely beautiful event. Gronk was also part of the show, and it was I think there's one more slide on this. Okay, two. So this is Linda and Marisela, and if we can move forward one more. Okay, that one more. That's Roberto. That's the one. That was the entire cast and crew. On the left, you can see a woman sort of hanging with her arm down. That was a monster that was typical in any kind of monster movie where the monster is carrying the damsel in distress. And then there's Marisa with that particular queen from outer space garb. That's me right next to her. And then there's Linda, and then there is Talou. Talou is on the right, and that was created, designed, and produced by Sean Carrillo, and that was all part of ASCO 82. So that was the group at that time. So I'm going to go back to the altar now. There are 3 levels of the altar. The first level is the connective tissue, if you will. It is the elements that connect every single person in terms of their life. It could be food, it could be flowers, it could be candles. There is nothing truly specific about that level unless you want to make it specific, but it truly is about the connective tissue. The second level is typically about what is truly specific to the person that you are honoring. So it could be food, it could be cigarettes, it could be an article of clothing, it could be a book, it could be, what I have done in the past is I have put glasses, like eyeglasses, or a bus pass for my father because he used to ride the bus all the time. So those are very specific to the person that you are honoring. And then the third level is the most revered. It's like an apex. So it's the highest level. It is considered the highest level is considered the most in touch with the spirituality. So that's where you put, and it's also the most revered and the most honored and also the most visible. So you put the photograph, a nice big photograph of the person that you are honoring. Now, throughout the altar, you can include other photographs of people who are also being recognized and also being honored. Um, that said, nothing precludes it um, from you including multiple photographs. So, uh, in addition to that, you will find marigolds. Now, marigolds is the Day of the Dead flower. It is considered the flower of the dead, and that's for two reasons. One, if you open that, even if you're around the marigold, you will smell its pungent scent. It is a very strong scent. And once upon a time, there was no way to mask the smell of death. And so there were marigolds in abundance because their scent is so strong that it would mask the smell of death. The other reason is because if you take a marigold and you open it up, there are seeds, like millions of seeds. It's just a ton of seeds in that marigold. And that is truly the concept of Day of the Dead. So through this death comes life. The seeds inside are the smell of death, but they are emblematic or representative of the life that's coming. So through death comes life, and through life comes death. It's a circular motion. So that is a really big part of the Day of the Dead, which is the marigolds. There are elements. The earth is to connect. Air, of course, is to breathe. Um, the water is to sustain, and fire is to both uh, make sure that you don't freeze, but also it is a very powerful force. It is the life force. Um, that's Margaret Sosa. She was, I don't I don't know where she is now, but she was one of the most creative and artistic people. She was known for her papel picado. She was absolutely amazing as an artisan in this specific craft. She was that's Yolanda Gonzalez. She's also part of the SelfHelp Graphics family. Um, so the next thing I'm going to talk about are the skulls. The skulls, as I mentioned before, are very prominently featured because one of the things that I want to call attention to is that it is not, Day of the Dead is not a scary celebration. It is a celebration of life. It is a celebration of your past. It's a celebration of your own life. And this particular face, the skin that we call a face, is a mask. This is how I view it. It is a mask because underneath we all have a skull, and underneath we are all the same. No one can tell by a skull. If you view a skull, no one can tell whether that skull was male, female, gay, straight, Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, right wing, left wing, independent. You cannot tell anything about a person just based on the skull. So that is the great equalizer. There is a saying in Spanish that everyone is the same in the grave, meaning once you're there, you're just like everybody else. So why not treat everybody in life just the way death treats everybody in death? You have to, this is why I love the celebration so much, because it is really important in terms of my own social justice um, perspective and belief and work, that the custodian or the garbage collector is just as important as the president of the United States or the president of any other country, because ultimately we all have a value and ultimately we all contribute. So we are really truly all the same. In terms of other elements on the The altar Pandem Muerto is a big element as well. Pandem Muerto is really reminding us again about our ephemeral quality. There is only one element in the pan de muerto. There are several types of pan de muerto. Um, there's one that is a round, um, sort of mound kind of piece of bread that has what looks to be a skull hand, a skeletal hand on top of it. And that's basically letting you know that death is not too far away. Then there is the gingerbread kind of bread that just also lets us know that you are going to be consumed one way or another. And then the third one is where there is a little head, a plastic head, and a huge body. And that is the same thing. It's you're going to be consumed, and really the only thing that's going to be left is the skull. And so you honor that skull. Um, the the part that I also want to talk about in terms of the altar is the personal items. I know I mentioned earlier that you can be anything from books to eyeglasses to anything else. Anything is appropriate at an altar. So I have seen um, a baby's dress on an altar that was partially burned, and that was the dress that the baby wore during a fire. There is there are there are two different days in the Day of the Dead, and I'm going to just come back for that because of the baby, the reference to the baby. So November 1st is All Saints Day. November 2nd is All Souls Day. November 1st is dedicated to children because they are considered free of sin and therefore more saint-like. So you will find altars for children. I remember going to Mexico and having visiting a cemetery on November 1st and then again on November 2nd. And on the November 1st date, there was a family with a mom that was introducing the baby in her arms to the sister who was buried in the cemetery. And the other sister was playing hopscotch with her dead sister with two pieces of two little chips. And she would use one to play for herself and then use the other to play for her sister. And it was a really beautiful, it was so beautiful. It was a very, very enriching experience for me. And I had a better understanding of the celebration. And this was years and years ago. So I really appreciated that because it gave me more of a foundation to understand the celebration. Personal items include anything that you can think of, whatever the person loved, whatever the person wore, whatever the person interacted with. So, for example, it could be a Game Boy thing for now. I've seen everything now. Photographs, of course, throughout the altar are very important. It could be someone you know and revere and honor and loved and had a personal connection or a personal relationship with. It could also be people you don't know, but somehow have impacted your life. I did an altar for the women of Juarez. I've done several altars for the women of Juarez because as I mentioned earlier, there is a value for life in every way possible. The women of Juarez are being hired to make electronics. So we may not know it, but some of the computers that we're using could have been made, parts of those could have been made by some of the young women who have been murdered in Juarez. There's also the Orlando victims, the Ayotzinapa victims, the COVID-19 victims, the AIDS victims, the El Paso victims, victims of police brutality. All of those, they are in some way impacting our lives because we have now either benefited directly from their work or benefited directly or indirectly from their deaths. the social justice now because of the deaths of victims of police brutality. There is Every one of us has been impacted in some way. So, Gabe, I want to just, this is my own personal, if you can stop here, that is actually me and my two children. Way back in the day, I was very, very young, obviously. I was very surprised to see that, but that we're all looking at Sister Karen right in the middle of that board, where we all had a relationship with her. My sons were very fortunate to have gotten to know her. She was an amazing, amazing woman, not a typical nun at all. And I was very grateful to her because she was instrumental in so many of us in the community really understanding our value, not only as artists, but just say plain and simply as members of the community, because no one was turned away from Self-Help Graphics. And I mean, no one. It was a really amazing place, and it still is. That's one of the most important legacies that Sister Karen has left, and that is that no one is turned away from Self-Help Graphics, and Self-Help Graphics creates an opportunity for people to really understand who they are, and not only as artists or as people who can value art, but people who exist within this community. So I thank you so much, Gabe, for pausing there. I really wanted to just focus on that a little bit. So danzantes are a part of the celebration. Danzantes really make there is a ceremony that goes with the celebration, and danzantes oftentimes will really present or represent that ceremony in a very important and significant way. And then they go about doing either the death dance. There's a death dance that is very indigenous, and then and that's to honor the dead. And there's also dances to celebrate the life. There are different celebrations for people who have in indigenous times, where if depended on how the person died, whether it was through childbirth or through drowning or through defending as a warrior, the community, all of those had different levels of um, uh, of celebration. They were honored differently, but they were all ultimately honored during the Day of the Dead. One of the things about that I do want to leave you with, in terms of, if nothing else, Ofelia Esparza, who I believe is building an altar or has built an altar there, and I always refer to what she says because it's so true, and that is there are 3 different types of deaths. The first was when life ceases to exist in the body. The second is when the body ceases to exist in visual form, either through burial or through drowning or loss at sea, or through but you are no longer able to see the body. And the third, and the most tragic, is the death of memory, when people's memories cease to exist in the lives of those who still are alive. And Day of the Dead is truly about remembering. I don't want to forget my ancestors, my family. So in my home, I have a perpetual altar, one that I never take down. I see the photographs of my mother, of my father, of my brother every day, and they are not scary to me. They are not ghosts. They are not goblins. It has nothing to do with Halloween. Day of the Dead is about connecting and maintaining a relationship with your dead, whether it's your parents or with your sisters or your siblings or your friends, or even people you don't know. So one of the things that I also want to share with you is a story of a woman who I met years ago, and her aunt had committed suicide, and the day she was buried was the last day she was allowed to speak her name. She was never able to speak her name again. And so it was very troubling to her. And when I met her, she wasn't aware of the Day of the Dead, did not know anything about it. And so I encouraged her to build a tiny altar. And it doesn't matter the size. What matters is what you put into it. What matters is how you connect with it. So she built a tiny, tiny altar with a cardboard box. And on it, she included very personal items. Her aunt used to like to smoke menthol cigarettes, so, and sit on a brick wall and smoke. So she created a replica of this brick wall, a tiny replica, and she put a menthol cigarette on it. And then she put in pictures of what she had, plus things that were very connecting to her. She put in an earring that reminded her of her aunt. She put in a candy that reminded her of her aunt. She put in a whole bunch of stuff. She shared the photograph with me because she did create this in her home. And she asked me, Consuelo, how long do I keep this up? And I said, you don't ever have to take it down. You keep it up as long as you need to. If you want to take it down, then you don't need to have it up anymore. But you keep it up as long as you want. And that's what she did. And she actually never took it down. Just like me, I have a perpetual altar that I've never taken down. And it is something that I always go to when I feel very disconnected, or I feel vulnerable, or I feel like I just need to connect with my mom or my dad or my brother. Um, the food for the altar is very important as well. And I say that because every time I cook food that I learned to cook because of my mom, I feel her. I am I'm surrounded by her presence. I can talk to her, even if it's not out loud. I have a conversation with her and I feel more at peace. And it's very important to recognize that this is a celebration that really connects you to your family. It and makes the demarcation between life and death much more fluid. It is very, very important that for me, I maintain that relationship with my dead, especially now that I have a grandson, that I want him to know about his great grandfather and his great grandmother and his grand uncle who is named after him. So that's really important to me. Um, there are a couple of other things that I want to talk about. Like I said, the papel picado and the paper fashion show are very much alike in that there has an ephemeral quality and it is done on purpose. There are SelfHelp Graphics did recreate the paper fashion show, and it was done for the first time in 2019, and it was a beautifully done show. We were supposed to do it again in 2021 because of the pandemic. I don't know whether that's going to happen in the same time frame. It was done in May of 2019, and it will be done every other year. That was the idea. But as I said, I don't know whether that will happen in 2021. The other thing that I do want to just remind everybody is that Noche de Ofrenda is this Saturday. This Saturday, Noche de Ofrenda takes place at it's at Grand Park. Again, this is a special year because of the pandemic. Typically, we have over 40 altars. This year, I believe we're having maybe a dozen or less altars, but they're bigger in size, and they are socially distanced from each other so that people don't gather in too close proximity from the altars, and you are able to view them, and they are bigger. Um, let's see what else. Are there any questions at this time before I go into this year's exhibit at SelfHelp? Okay, so what I'm going to talk about then is this year's exhibit. My I have an altar this year for at SelfHelp Graphics, and it is called "The Roots of Our Resistance." The roots of our resistance. If we could go back, I'm sorry, Gabe, if we can go back to the print, the commemorative print, one back. That one. So this particular commemorative print was made by Sandy Rodriguez. Sandy Rodriguez is the curator for this year's show, and this particular print is a print of a painting, a self-portrait by her mother, Guadalupe. Guadalupe died just over a year ago, and so Sandy has made this commemorative print of her mother's self-portrait. And as she told itself, Sandy recounted the story of trying to find the self-portrait because in her experience, her life, I mean, we all understand that sometimes things come to us and we call it a sign, or we feel like people are talking to us. And so Sandy felt like her mom was talking to her after she secured the job or the role of curating this year's show. Her mom, Guadalupe, they were very much a duel. They had a really amazing approach to working together as a team, and they did a lot of they did paper fashion shows. They did a lot of work together. And so she said that her mom spoke to her and said, mija, go to the storage and get this. You need to do this print of my self-portrait. And now she went to the storage facility, and the storage facility had literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wrapped paintings, and she had no clue where anything was. And so again, she said something told her to move one of the large paintings away from a wall, and there in an opaque, translucent wrapped paper or paper wrapped piece was the self-portrait. So she said that it was very much her mother telling her to do this. So she got the print and she was able to do this print. So this is a print, a silk screen print of a self-portrait that was done by Sandy's mom. So Sandy did the print of Sandy's mom's self-portrait, and that is the commemorative print. So I just feel even more honored because these two women are amazing artists. They have pioneered so many things. They are each recognized um, and have received accolades from the city of Los Angeles to, I mean, just in every aspect of their work. And they are so, so revered in our community. If you don't know about them, please know about them. Please check them out. Look for anything on them. They are just amazing. Their work is beautiful. And very, very, there is definitely a community recognition and sort of a social justice aspect to their work. So I wanted to share that about the commemorative print because I felt it was really telling, especially for the Day of the Dead celebration. So my altar there at SelfHelp Graphics this year is called The Roots of Our Resistance. And the roots of our resistance is really about the Black and brown members of our community who have been the first responders, the essential workers, the ones who have had the most exposure to the COVID virus and who have died as a result of that. And we are the most impacted, the highest impacted community in all of the US communities. The Black and brown communities are the most impacted, Latino and Black. So it was not hard for me to find images of Black and Latino victims of COVID to put together on, like, to print, cut, and paste onto a frame and then add it to my altar. And so if you look at that, you will see, and this is a tiny, and I mean a tiny, tiny percentage of the people who have actually died. There are in the thousands, in the tens of thousands, the victims of COVID who have died who are Black and Latino. So I needed to honor them because so in other altars that I've made, whether they were the women of Juarez or the students of Ayotzinapa or the victims of the Orlando nightclub shooting, they were in very specific places and they had very specific roles in our community. Not in this case. In this case, we don't have a clue as to who will carry that virus. And so we are all exposed. And if I were an essential worker, if I didn't have the luxury of being able to work from home or study from home or do things from home, if I had to go to work, I would be one of those people who would be absolutely exposed. And so therefore, but the grace of God go I. And I need to honor these workers. I need to honor their contribution to making my life easier and my life better. So that's why I chose to honor the victims, the Black and Latino victims of COVID, in my altar this year at SelfHelp Graphics. So, and I will be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed that talk. I mean, it was so informative, and I didn't know about the practice of disinterring, in the indigenous culture. And so I was really interested to hear about that, and a lot of us were, in the levels of the altar. We have posted down at the bottom of the screen links to SelfHelp Graphics Dia de los Muertos celebration and their YouTube channel. And those links will be on the Facebook and the YouTube pages. And I wanted to add also that the commemorative print is available for sale, and that if you follow the SelfHelp Graphics link, you can see the exhibition, you can see Consuelo's work, and you can also see, the commemorative print and purchase the commemorative print. I did have a couple of questions for you. So I was really interested if there's a tradition related to the stilt walkers and the giant puppets, or is that something that kind of came about here in Los Angeles?
Well, there's always, so yes and no. It as in everything else, it is a fluid celebration. So things can come into it one year that may not be present the next year, or it may be added on. It may be bigger. There are a lot of esqueletos that are part of the celebrations in Mexico, and they do have these great big paper mache characters that are either skeletons or big heads. And part of the reason is, in Mexico, paper is easily acceptable, it's inexpensive, and glue is made with flour. So those are the very basic materials that are needed. And so people go to town. If you've never been to Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico, I highly recommend it when we can, because they are just spectacular. They're everything from fireworks to the paper mache. Paper mache was really big, is still really big in Mexico, because it is a basic material. It's very easily accessible, and you can manipulate it and be very artistic with it and very creative with it. And so the Linares family, for example, the Linares family is a very famous family in Mexico because of their paper mache work for specifically Day of the Dead. So yes.
That's cool. Have you been approached by, I know there was this story that I've heard that a while back, SelfHelp Graphics was invited to go to Scotland to do
They did.
Dia de los Muertos. Yeah, were you part of that group or?
No, I was not. It was Yolanda Gonzalez, Margaret Sosa, who did the papel picado, and Ofelia Esparza.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those three women went to Scotland. There was an exchange. They did work over there. They did a presentation for Dia de los Muertos there, and then they came back, and our artists from Scotland or from Scotland came to the U.S. to do work here.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm always curious where different cultures kind of intersect, and one wants to learn about the other's culture, and there's an exchange.
So one of the things that I will say about that is that there are only two countries in the world that do not acknowledge their dead. One is the United States and one is Britain/England.
Oh, wow.
Every other country in the world acknowledges their dead in some way, and they have an honoring of their dead. And that is really, really important. In the United States, I can only speak to the United States because this is where I was raised, but you can never, you just don't mention death. You don't mention illness. You can't be too healthy. You can't be too young. It's just you don't want to acknowledge death or illness in any way because it reminds you of your own mortality. And in this country, people are not really given the tools to process or to acknowledge and to live with death.
Oh, that's so true. It's really interesting. Thank you so much, Consuelo. We really enjoyed your talk. Do you have anything you want to tell us about or promote? We have your Facebook link there on the bottom of the screen.
So the Facebook has a lot of stuff in it about my personal life and on my artistic life. I tend to share, and I'm very open. I'm an open book because I feel like we all go through trials and tribulations. I have faced death numerous times, especially in the last 3 years with my husband, who faced 4 catastrophic illnesses that almost killed him each time. And yet he is healthy and he is alive. And even though we are locked up in a home, we have a lot to be grateful for and a lot to celebrate. So for me, this particular celebration, and this is what I always bring home to me, is that it is a daily acknowledgement of our own fortuitous position in life. And we have to acknowledge that we may not have everything that we need, but especially now with this COVID, everything that we want, but we do have everything that we need.
Right.
And I want people to not despair. I want people to acknowledge how beautiful life is, even if we are self-isolating.
Right. That's really meaningful right now. And I think, people are watching you from home, so we all appreciate that sentiment, definitely.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate your time. I want to just quickly plug our next event, which is tomorrow. SelfHelp Graphics will conclude their week of events with Martha Carrillo teaching papel picado. It's a workshop. You'll learn how to do it. There's even a link to a template so people can try this at home. And you'll be learning 3 different ways to do it, starting from the beginning way to the traditional way they do it in Mexico. And then just so everybody knows, our event after that, November 5th, might be interesting to people. It is a plant-based Mexican cooking workshop. Todo Verde is going to come and show us all how to make vegan carnitas, which is really interesting. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.